Can we turn the tide, fellow armchair generals? This is Gamer 1745 here playing the Endsieg DLC for Order of Battle. And we're going to see what we can do. And again, to everyone who wants to see the series continue, Ari and others, please smash that like button. Post 2 comments. That feeds the algorithm. Share this with a friend, whatever. But we're going to continue. We have held so far, because we have to hold them until the end of 20 turns, 2 more turns it looks like. All of our primary objectives, we've not lost them, and we've hold 3 of 2 are needed, but we held 2 more secondary VPs. We've destroyed more than enough tanks, though we didn't kill enough partisan units in the first 10 turns, but we have killed more now. So that's something I probably should have focused on a little bit more. Now, so our goal now is to try to farm some more points while not losing too many points. For future operations. Okay. $35 might end up being a little bit of a problem. We're moving up. Could have been maybe a bit more bold, but all right, let's see. Okay, shocked by the Allied threat to mainland Italy, the country has agreed to an armistice. German forces have begun to disarm their former comrades and rush to organize a coherent defense against further Allied advance. Okay, Axis is broken. Well, okay, I'm pretty sure there's going to be Soviet troops in there. Now here, that gets anti-tank support, but let's see first. Yeah, we can drop on them, and we're going to fly away from the AA again. Here in straight, guys. Oh, good, did some damage. And again, fly away from the AA again back there. Here, yeah, I want to just take the base. Let's see. Reconnaissance cannot occupy objectives. Alright, we'll take them. They can go in there, but can't take them, so that's good. Yeah, but I think they've been pounded pretty hard. They're not going to do well. No damage. Here's I was thinking not much, but no damage is good too. These guys can move up here because again, I think there's somebody in the town. Yeah, I don't need to move it right up town. I think. I don't think. Okay, so we have the anti-tank gun as well. It's forgotten about from last time. And yes, occupying. We'll just move up here for the moment. Super low and maybe out now on ammo. Not really being threatened. You can go to there. Don't really want them to come out of their position and attack me. Well, let's move through, yeah, through the forest, I guess. Well, let's see. Did you fire? Yes. Well, you can move up to here for next turn. Well, you can just move to here. Just give this whole area a little bit more. Ooh, good. We got a fighter in good condition. We'll keep away from the AA gun. Come up there. Yeah. Artillery. Keep them from. There. Hoping some of these very weak units, I don't know which will continue to the next mission or not, right offhand. I'm hoping it will just reinforce the ones that we are going to in between missions. Last turn. Oh, unless I should have done an airstrike first. Well, let's do that now. Maybe I can just end the unit. Nope. And attack there and now in deep woods, or however you want to determine the title of that. Okay, that is a 57mm gun. We can. Well, there's that AA, so I'm not going to go with it. Don't need to weaken my limited air force. right now. Okay, well they're pretty damn weak at the moment. Oh well, they can't make it to there. Weeks. They can't make it to there, but these guys can make it here and hopefully take out the airstrip. Not quite. Not unexpected. But we're going to use them next turn. Again. I don't know if pushing there is going to achieve us anything good at this time frame. Fire artillery. I don't think that'll have a negative effect on us. Yeah, let's send our weakened Luftwaffe back to base. Here. Yeah, I just don't think pushing harder right now is going to do us any good. As opposed, yeah, meaning what we're going to lose from attacks are necessarily going to be, you know, more profitable to us than not, you know, not losing them. I think yes. Okay, victory. A victory has been achieved in the face of overwhelming odds. Hope is growing that with a few more such victories, we will be able to regain the initiative in the war. Right, well, yeah, they may hope that, but that wouldn't be historically possible, even with a few victories, in my opinion, at this point. So let's, no, I need to say replay and recording this. As expected, allies land at Salerno. As expected, more determined Allied invasion is now targeting the port of Salerno, south of Naples. Simultaneously, a British airborne operation is underway against the main Italian naval base at Taranto. All right. Okay, continue. You have gained 4 new specialization points. You want to consider? Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, we have 4. To do Bow Commando Becker, Major Becker. Learned of him through Hearts of Iron 3, Black Ice. The mechanical engineer will set up a vehicle modification fabrication center to convert and combine captured vehicles and weapons to usable instruments for the German army. Effects. MARD anti-tank becomes available for purchase. SDKF 135 motorized artillery becomes available for purchase. Right, well, we can scan over here because we have these, I believe, all the green ones. So at this point, Waffen SS2, and it would be nice, and I don't know if we should save up for something like Panzerlehr. Nice. These series are different. Yeah, that would be nice, but air guided bombs, uranium project. Well, I think we'll do this. That will give us 1 remaining, and hopefully we'll earn some more. Maybe that, or maybe save up for Panzerlehr or Waffen SS. More? Okay, so let's acquire this. There we go. Close that. Now, okay, Kiev region. Following the recapture of Kiev, the Soviet forces advance on Fastov and Zoltomir, but are met by strong German counterattacks. Well, people seem to like when I blather on about things, so I'll talk about the situation as we see it currently here. November 1943, and the map looks approximately like this. I think in the 43, I think Finland's still in the war, but it's sort of the continuation war. There were German troops fighting in Finland, mostly up here, like trying to push Murmansk. Finland did not want to push past beyond their historical borders, particularly down here. But yeah, this is, give or take a little bit, is the situation. Now, I don't know the date, but I think I'm going to... Singer von Etterlund, I think is his name. There's Etterlund and Singer in there. I sometimes mess his name up. I read his book. I have it on my shelf over there. Neither hope nor fear. Neither hope of victory nor fear of defeat or whatever. He knew the war was lost, but he continued fighting. I really admire, and I guess I fixed on this from Frederick the Great, King of Frederick the Third, I believe, King of Prussia, who was a brilliant general, very much so. He, and this is sort of later in his life, greatly admired George Washington. Why? He never met him, only read reports about them. But what he admired about George Washington was his, and as particularly after sort of the Battle of New York, in which the British come and occupy New York City. Somewhat, not a strong loyalist enclave, but there were definitely loyalists of a significant number there. So it wasn't entirely an unwelcome. Where Boston, there were very, very few loyalists. Most Bostonians wanted the British out, and you have the whole Battle of Bunker Hill and whatnot, which George Washington was a part of, I believe. But because he was bringing artillery down and supplies, yeah. But yeah, I don't think he was in command of the army yet. Maybe he was. I'm sorry, I don't remember all this. But so the British get driven out of Boston, and for a time, basically, and I hope I'm getting the history more or less right. For a time, in what is sort of the colonies there's no large British occupation. Even in areas that are rather pro-British, everything's just sort of quiet, because the British fleet and army get driven out of Boston, because that's where the rebellion was thought to be happening, and the middle and southern colonies were not yet an open rebellion when the whole Boston situation breaks out. Lexington, Concord, and all that up in the north. So that's where the rebellion breaks out. That's where you send the army. Well, they withdrew the army, and in good condition. The British get out from there, and I think go up to Quebec or somewhere in Canada, and they come back come charging back into New York, which basically they hold New York until more or less the end of the war. They continue to hold New York after Cornwallis's surrender, which ends all major campaigning in the colonies, and that's at some point after Cornwallis's defeat at Yorktown and the withdrawal. They go into surrender, but some British fleet elements get out. Not many, not much. But after that whole surrender situation there, not much gets out. From was it Rochambeau? forget, French admiral. But no, de Grasse. It's de Grasse. Admiral de Grasse is the one who battles off the relief column in there. There isn't much naval fleet strapped in Yorktown, but they try to get the main British fleet in. De Grasse battles them out. I know I'm talking about the American Revolution, but back to the Battle of New York. Basically, the Continental Army that under Washington is occupying and defending New York area, if you will. Well, he is able to withdraw his army while the British sort of, and they're out on Long Island, I think, basically, which is not Manhattan Island where New York City is at the time. It's grown beyond that now. But the sort of island, large island off the coast, he withdraws them in the face of the British Navy and the British landing forces through fog and whatnot, and gets them out. As well as other withdrawals. But see, why with all these withdrawals, why, and very few at this point, victories for Washington, why is Frederick the Great an admirer of Washington? Because he is able to withdraw his army intact in the face of a superior enemy. And so, you know, if your army's trapped and you get it out, that's a victory. LA. Yes, those who watch know I blank on names for some reason. Dunkirk. Yeah, just got to get the right name. I'm picturing all kinds of stuff, but for some reason the name blocks on me. The Dunkirk is a victory. Now, before you start arguing at me, and love if you did, helps the algorithm, but do know I'm not saying the campaign to stop Germany from invading France through Belgium is a victory. No, the withdrawal is a victory. Because if you get your army out intact, and that army is not terribly intact, but still most of those units are, you know, they're more or less mobs, but most of them, the soldiers still carrying their rifles, and they abandon all their equipment and try to destroy it. But Becker is one of the people that rejuvenates some of the equipment. He gets that army out largely intact there, and gets it able to be able to defend Britain. There's other later withdrawals of British forces down in France that you're actually withdrawing all the equipment as well. You know, I mean, truly intact, and they have the time, and they get a few divisions, or they get out and other stuff in other locations before the Germans get there to rebuild the British Army. So, what von Etterlin, he's in command of this Sardinia and Corsica. He has a few German divisions. Well, after the complete success of the Allies in Sicily, and I believe, this is where I'm not sure, after the initial landings down here in the Toe, this is approximately, I think, Naples Bay here. So that Salerno is right around here. Taranto is over here, the naval base where it was the British airborne operations. But I think as this part, because they initially jump across the Straits of Messina and start pushing up the toe of Italy before the invasions. At this time frame, with Allied air dominating this area, with the Allied naval forces dominating this area. I'm not sure how much it's the German high command, whether it's not really so much Berlin, but it would be Kesselring in Rome or thereabouts. And well, I'm not sure how much they're approving of it, but Etterlin sees that this is useless. You know, Yes, if holding it here, holding this territory here, it denies the Allies' air and naval bases to strike along here. Absolutely. But he knows he can't defend it. And he also knows that there might be, I don't know, food security in the idea that it grows enough food so the troops aren't going to starve, but they're going to be cut off. These forces are going to be cut off. And after watching, seeing how strong the invasion was down here, they know they're not going to hold it. So and they're mainly holding most of the forces are down in Sardinia. He withdraws all of the German forces up through Sardinia into Corsica, and from Corsica over to Italy without, to my understanding, a loss of a single German life, and with all of their equipment. He withdraws in the face of the enemy, and it's a very skillful withdrawal. Even though it wasn't like quite withdrawing in the face of the enemy, like having delaying forces while they were landing on it. He knew that if it got to that point, they were going to be cut off, and it wasn't going to be good. So he brought his forces out and able to continue to fight in there. But at this point, remember what Gamer always says: warfare is a political act. Politics are perception, okay? So all you need to do, in a way, is be perceived as winning the war, and you can win the war without actually, necessarily winning the war. You might say, not entirely, but to some degree you might say that's what happens with France. Germany is winning the war in actuality as well, because France has committed all of its reserves and getting most of them trapped up here. And that is true, as that was, and see, remember Churchill, the French and the English aren't really communicating very well, and because the French aren't even communicating very well with themselves. But Churchill comes, he's Lord of the Admiralty, meaning the sort of civilian head of the Admiralty. So he's not, I don't think, been privy to, and whatever even the British know about the plans here. And the British forces here are basically under the strategical French control, not maybe tactical, but strategical French control. And so Churchill is shocked to learn, who is an army officer. Churchill is an army officer. He's been Lord of the Admiralty twice now, and then becoming Prime Minister. So he's very Navy focused as well. So he's experienced in naval affairs and army affairs. He's shocked to find out that at least the French consider they do not have a reserve anymore. So when Churchill is trying to get the French to, well, can you commit the reserves? This is before even Dunkirk is really being evacuated, or as it's sort of being evacuated. He's sort of flabbergasted to find out that they don't have reserves. Well, yes and no. Okay. How do I put this? And I'm armchair generaling it for many years later, and you could easily say you don't know what the F you're talking about, and that might be quite true. But the French have reserves, okay? They have reserves. Depending on the date, eventually you get the Italians attacking down in here. But more or less, the French are holding. As far as I can tell, the French are holding the Italians. There's a lot of fortifications on both sides of the border between France and Italy. But the French are holding here. And there are French forces holding, down in Spain. And of course, there's French colonial forces. Now, some of the colonial forces had already been, during the Phony War period, had already been brought up there. And I'm sure there are rear area forces. But the French don't see any of them as the reserve. So the perception is, by the French High Command, they don't have a reserve to commit, or reserve to commit that is enough to deal with the Germans. That's perception. Germans are the German high command, as Rommel, Guderian, and others are racing, up towards Dunkirk. They're not so much the generals, but the higher commander, worrying about counterattacks, getting, the flanks aren't secure. They're worrying about it. And then, yes, at Arras, you do have the attempt at a pincer movement. The British on one side, the French on the other. The French can't get their act together really much. The British sort of, that doesn't really work out. But, and it's sort of a scary moment, if you will. But yeah, the British and the French had forces at that point that could have cut the Germans off. They just, and I know I've talked about another time, didn't have the command loop, from the French headquarters to figure out what's going on, to order the troops to get there quick enough, to do all this. The Germans were moving too fast. But the Germans are worried about the high command's perception. Most of the high command is sitting over here right at the moment, not back in Berlin. They're all worried about their flanks. When they didn't, not that they shouldn't be concerned about their flanks, they should be, but the French mobile forces were either sort of cut off and already engaged and whatnot up here. The sort of the Arras attack, that was de Gaulle's France's first armored division, and it was I think like a week old. So just it's being formed of bringing together already existing units, but there is no coherent division as like trained for 6 months to fight as a division. It doesn't exist. It's just days old, literally. Maybe it's 2 weeks, but I think it's like less than a week old. And so he hasn't even got all of the units assigned to this division. They're ready for when he's attacking with it. So, the French do not have a centralized, coherent, motorized strike force of any strong degree left down here. By the time, most of it gets cut off up there. The British are mostly motorized, semi-motorized. Not, yeah. How do I put this? You can always use more trucks, but eventually enough trucks just becomes a burden on either the road network or on the fuel supplies or on whatever else. So you may have a fully motorized division and you have battalions marching along the road. Why? Well, you could pick all those troops up in trucks and drive them there, but then where are you going to move? What trucks are you going to use to move food, ammunition, fuel? So where you're assigning your trucks, and as the war goes on and as more and more modern war goes, trust me, the modern American army, if it has, the ports and whatever ability, because yes, it can do airborne drops or do light landing, but the modern American army has enough trucks to drive all of the soldiers and carry all of the supplies in the theater, and can do that. We saw that in their massive and very effective invasion of Iraq. And you don't have to march anywhere other than when you want to march, to protect your sides. You don't want to have guys riding in the trucks or riding in the APCs and getting ambushed. The American army really, you got the 10th Mountain Division that's trained to fight in mountains, so they probably have all the trucks they need, but getting in rough terrain or something, they may need to march then, because trucks can't get there. But you get my point, is with the modern American army, today's American army, trucks ain't the difficulty, as in enough to move around, and you only need to get out and walk, and you may need to walk for miles and miles and miles, but you're just you don't want to be ambushed, as it were. You want to have your infantry moving along. And that may, that is not necessarily the case even with motorized. The BEF, the British Expeditionary Force, is largely a motorized force. But we can talk about particular battalions or whatnot might not have the trucks on any one day because they're moving stuff around. So the British do have the mobility to react to Germany's forces, because outside of the few panzer divisions, and a few motorized infantry divisions. Germany is largely a horse. Yes, they'll have a few, Kubelwagens. They'll have a few, maybe have a few towed artillery pieces from motorized support. They'll have a few other trucks just as supply trucks, but most of the division is walking or being towed by horses, for most divisions. They'll have a little, a few armored cars to do reconnaissance or whatever. They'll have a little bit of motorization, but as a division, it's a walking division, in most of them in 1940. So, yeah, Britain is motorized. France has motorized units, but they're not coherent in a large formation. But France is beaten. I mean, they're in a way almost beaten before the invasion starts. So warfare. Warfare is a political act. Politics is perception. So France perceived that it did not have. I'm not saying it did have forces capable of defeating the German invasion post Dunkirk. What I'm saying is, France believed it didn't have forces, and so it gave up the fight, right? Okay, so it gave up the fight. Earlier on than 43, had Germany launched Barbarossa 2 or 3 or 4 weeks earlier, I don't quite know what ground hardness situation versus the mud, how early they could have gone and been able to effectively move. Had they gone earlier and been a little better set up to invade, a little better on motorization, a little better, and they did have some plans, and they did have work units set up to deal with destroyed bridges and things like that, but a little better plan to deal with the railways and supplies. And had you gotten to to Moscow 4 or 6 weeks earlier and in a big enough thing, Moscow or they may have just, the troops and everybody there may have just panicked and started to flee. The Cheka or whatever, the NKVD or, pre-KGB days, whatever you want to call these different groups, may have not been able to keep order, and Germans may have shown up to find the city in chaos and in flames as the Soviets flee, and taking it that early may have given the perception to the Soviet soldier, we've lost. And that may have become the fact that they lost. And we can talk about, had Stalingrad gone different, had they achieved getting the oil, had they achieved continuing, able to continue to supply their war industry longer, and other things. And we can also talk about securing the Mediterranean early enough. Yes, I think a fortress Europe with the Mediterranean closed to America without an active front on the Soviet Union, meaning some sort of, whether it's a peace treaty or a ceasefire, some sort of, settlement options here. I know I've talked a long time, so I'm going to save this. Some sort of, like say ceasefire with whatever sort of Soviet governments, that may be something that you need to leave a fairly strong watch the border, divisions, corps sitting out there, but you could leave it to mostly, infantry divisions, second line divisions. I've been able to move all of that reserve and all of like the active Air Force operations back to Germany and not have, an active front on the east. I'm not sure that the U.S., and we can talk about nuclear weapons, but short of nuclear weapons, I don't know that the U.S. is able to defeat Germany at that point. I don't know. That's a big, because that's going to be one. You got to, which Germany is able to maintain up until the literally the last days, until Hitler's dead. The will to fight, the political perception will to fight. They're able to maintain that till the last days. So you've got to beat that, and or you have to literally destroy all their forces. So yeah, America, I'm sure, could pick out, be able to set up and do a D-Day, multiple points, or maybe just down here, cutting off the north, getting Norway, and putting enough air power over to get Norway. Now that would do it. And then even though there's, Fortress Europe with American, and if they haven't gotten Spain into the war, with Americans' mobility, they'd be able to land out here, but then you would have, whether it's Rommel or somebody else, desert battles out here, and, lots of air operations here. And if you're holding the Suez Canal, you might be able to eventually grind your way into Germany. I'm not saying America couldn't do that. America was willing to take heavy casualties in the war. Wasn't casualty sensitive. We can see that particularly on the war with Japan. But I do believe that there are ways that Germany could have won World War II. We could even talk about a very rapid sea lion, within weeks, not months, but less than 2 months after the fall of France. Now, Germany wasn't prepared for that, but had they because they weren't even prepared to defeat France, quite honestly. The Germans were not prepared for the defeat of France, I would say. The German High Command was still stuck in World War One and hoping to defeat France, but they weren't prepared, that it was going to happen then. They were thinking, okay, well, we push in here and we take Belgium, and then we push in here and take this next year, and the year after that we take next year. And in 4 years or in 2 years or whatever it is, we've got France. They weren't prepared to get it in their, Fallgelb and Fall Rot. I don't know. Sorry. Their second offensive down and towards Paris. They weren't prepared to get it that fast. Had they sort of thought ahead, we might do this during the phony war. And so I'm not necessarily thinking years beforehand, but you contemplate it years beforehand because it's a possible enemy. So you draw up plans on how you might do it. But during the phony war period, had you at that point start figuring out, some of these barges on the Rhine, we should maybe start converting them to landing craft, and maybe we should see about doing this and this other thing, and sort of having some sort of plan, some sort of what are we going to do before Britain is able to build up any coastal defenses, or at least anything new. So we had stuff left over from World War One and generations before, but anything new, and just within weeks pushed in. They very well might have created the perception of all-powerful, all-conquering German army, and British resistance collapse. But give them time, and Churchill, they got that that stiff idea of resistance that they wouldn't have collapsed. But had it happened fast, it might have. So again, perception, warfare, we don't know. But to get back to, November 43 with this sort of conditions, I do not see any realistic possibility of a German survival, a National Socialist German survival. I do not see it. Because, I reassessed over the years now how far along I think they were on nuclear weapons. I originally was like, they're nowhere close, particularly looking at the size of the Manhattan Project. The literal cities, maybe even small cities they're building, and some of the buildings, they're still there. They're huge buildings and sort of nowhere in like Tennessee or Kentucky out there, and they've just been shut down. And the the separator, the centrifuges that separate the materials, they're all sitting there just rotting away. And I think partially because they may be a bit radioactive. Seen some people go in and examine, not take them apart, but go in and walk around briefly. I don't think it's like glowing radioactive like Chernobyl that you need to put on a radioactive suit to just visit it, but it's not very cleaned up. And a lot of these were big multi-story solidly built buildings. They needed to be, but a lot of the towns that sprung up were just quick fabricated buildings that were either torn down shortly after the war, or have just rotted away since, because they're almost nothing. Because they put them up fast. They didn't plan on. They need to last like a year or two. That's it, and just be minimum use. And so the large scale of it that I didn't see in Germany, but now with some of the stuff that I've seen, not anywhere near that scale, but from a hell no possible way to, they're getting close. But I still think it's more of a, I don't even, had Germany been able to not be bombed to smithereens, and had they not been invaded, had for political reasons, had this stalled out here in the east, and had, Churchill was afraid of a landing here, he wanted to do more down here, but had they been sort of stalled to this conditions for a couple of years, shall we say, 46 maybe, but I even doubt even that. Probably more 47, getting a bomb or two. But they just didn't have the material, as far as I can tell, to build lots of bombs. So, yeah, maybe just because of shortness of range and perceived likelihood of knocking Britain out of war, they might have nuked London or something, or I don't know if they would have nuked the Soviet Union. Hitler was very fixated on terror weapons, so that would be a likelihood. What I think would have been a better likelihood, or no, a better tactical employment is because the invasion fleet fairly spread out, but once you found that it was Normandy or Calais, and once they got a few divisions ashore and sort of getting going, then order immediate withdrawal of the area, and then, as a complete surprise that it even exists, then nuke the beachhead, big mushroom cloud at that point, to show, hey, you invade the continent, we drop a nuke, kind of thing. Because because I'll tell you, if you would have nuked Washington D.C. and or New York, I don't think even the America bomber or whatever, the theoretical planes Germany had with the Condor or some of the other big bombers, they probably could have cobbled something together for a one-way mission. And then the pilots could fly well outside of the blast effects or something, maybe. But Enola Gay gets in some of that, but makes it back. But get out well outside of the blast effects. And I'm not saying a suicide mission. Well, I mean, I don't know what would happen to them afterwards. But the pilots could fly somewhere else and bail out, and we surrender, kind of thing. So it doesn't need to be a kamikaze suicide mission, but it could just be a one-way mission, and since it is not coming back. Germany really didn't have an effective, though they were heading that way, fly to America and come back bomber. But even if they did have one of those that they were working towards in theory or in practice, and they could have built one. It's not that they can't build them. They had the technology. They just didn't have the capability to build much of them. Putting together 1 or 10 of them, yeah. But what's that going to do for you? Yeah, okay, you drop a nuke. But if you don't have a bunch of the nuke, if you just nuke New York City and Washington, D.C., and that's all you can do, man in the high castle, yes, that's just going to enrage America. And you're going to really have to demonstrate to America that you're going to nuke more cities. And I really don't think Germany's going to have enough material to put more than just a handful of bombs together. So, yeah, and if you nuke London, with the American army, sitting in southeast Britain, well outside of any blast effects or real radiation problem at the time, because those bombs were not that, they weren't like modern nuclear weapons. That would just probably enrage the British more, not make them surrender. So yeah, I don't see Germany, even if, like I say, 46, 47, maybe getting a handful of nukes. Now, the America really didn't have much more than a handful of nukes itself, but still. but it had the ability to make more because it had ready access to the raw materials, particularly like down in the Belgian Congo, to ship it out, uranium and whatnot, and it had the infrastructure to make more of them. But it was more of a lack of immediate need for more nuclear weapons, and the knowledge, I believe, I'm not an expert on this topic, but the knowledge that there's going to be significant refinements before we want to start cranking out a bunch of them now that the war is ended. Meaning we don't need a bunch right now. We may need them in 5 or 10 years, but let's deal with that when we get to it. So in my opinion, at this stage, there's nothing, to win the war. There's nothing Germany can do to survive. The National Socialist Germany can do to survive the war at this stage. The war is lost. And what it really comes down to is what is going to be the conditions at the end of the war. And that's it. What's going to be the condition? Not necessarily like the surrender conditions, but who's occupying where, and who's setting up what governments where. That's it. Well, I think this is going to. I know this ended up being a talking episode here. Hope it was interesting. Do appreciate you all. See you next time for the Kiev region battles and see how we do. Thank you all.